on Twitter.
Great. Well, we should be live right now. So, hello, if everyone can hear me. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian Apologist. And right now I've got a few people with me and we're going to begin our conversations. So today we have two, actually it will add up to three, but right now we have two other theists and one atheist. And we're going to start with Heather telling us a little bit about her background and why she's here today to join us in this conversation.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie, for having me. I am happily married. We have 3 kids. We have lived all over the place in the United States. We have lived in Colorado, Pennsylvania. I've lived in Iowa. We've lived in, North Carolina. Let's see, Washington State. Where else? San Francisco, Southern California. So yeah, all over the place. Yeah, but I like to investigate historical documents and I like research. I like to write short stories. Student at SES working on getting a master's in religion.
Excellent. And let's jump over to Rene right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rene. I'm, as you may hear from my accent, from Germany. I'm 20 years old. I'm a university student, and I'm an atheist. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And we'll move over to Cy right now.
Hi, my name is Cy Gart. I'm a retired scientist. My specialty is in biochemistry and biology. And I am a Christian, but I began life as an atheist, grew up in an atheist family, and came to find Jesus Christ in early middle age. And I'm now very active in my church and very active in several organizations devoted to science and faith.
Excellent. I see the picture isn't keeping up with our speech, but we'll just have to deal with that a little bit. My name is Stephanie Thomason. I live in Florida. I'm also a mother with 2 kids and a husband. And I've been down in Florida for quite a few years. I moved here many years ago before most of you were probably born. So I moved from Chicago and I really dove into Christianity in the last 5 years. So I'm relatively new. And so as we move forward here, I think we were talking about different arguments and different things that we've heard on Twitter and different ways that we've been influenced. So I think we'll start. Heather, if you'd like to start, you wanted to mention a little bit about the cosmological argument and how you found that that was something that you've chatted with people about on Twitter, and maybe you could expound on that a bit.
Sure, absolutely. I would love to. A couple of years ago, I was introduced to the cosmological argument. And I'll say, first of all, some people are sensitive with the word argument. So if it helps to say the cosmological concept, then go that route. But either way, it's basically a syllogism. And it comes from the kalam syllogism that an Arab came up with a long time ago. And so it's stated in different ways, but it's basically 3 sentences. It's very easy. It's very simple. The first premise is that all things that have a beginning have a cause. The second premise is the universe had a beginning. And then the conclusion is, therefore, the universe has a cause. And so, yeah, you would need to look at each one of those individually. And we have been talking about it on Twitter, and the responses are, they vary. But the word cosmological comes from actually 2 different words, cosmos, which means the universe, and then logos, which means reasons for. And so basically there's 2 forms of the cosmological argument. And one has to deal with, it's called the horizontal concept, and it deals with going back in the past, going back to a beginning. So we can talk about that one in a minute. And then the other one is sometimes referred to as the vertical concept or the vertical argument. And so that one deals more of the present, the right now, and the existence of the universe as it is existing literally right now as we speak. So I have found that when I bring up the cosmological argument, sometimes it just goes right over people's heads. And so what I would ask right now is for people to really stop and think about this fundamental concept of cause and effect, because the first premise has to do with the concept of causality. And it's not something that should just go in one ear and out the other. I mean, you really need to stop and think that all things that have a beginning have a cause. And, you know, it's really a simple concept. Some people struggle with it, but we can't really get away from the fact that cause and effect is a reality. I mean, it's everywhere. You know, I've studied it, and I've studied even skeptics that comment on the concept of causality. And a skeptic like David Hume, for example, he even believed in cause and effect. The problem that I'm hearing, like from Bertrand, I think it's Bertrand Russell, people like that, they might say, well, if everything has a, you know, has a cause, then why doesn't God have a cause? And that's missing the whole point, because he can't cause himself. That would be a contradiction. How could he exist before he exists? So, you know, you really need to stop and think it through, that all things that have a beginning have a cause. And that's just the first premise. I don't know if we want to stop there and everybody can give their thoughts on that, or, you know, if you want me to go on to the second premise.
What do you, everybody else think? I think you made some great points. One of them is that the cause needs a cause. That's something that has always sort of gotten under my skin. So, because I feel like that is a misunderstanding of what God is. So.
I mean, it does, I think at the moment, have the potential to turn into a shouting match, but I'm going to risk it anyway. I think the first premise, I think there's kind of an equivocation with what will later be argued, that the universe basically came from nothing, and the causes are timeless, spaceless, immaterial being. And I think there's kind of an equivocation happening between creatio ex nihilo, which is creation from nothing, and creatio ex materia. I think in 100% of the cases we have observed so far, all we have observed is creatio ex materia, so matter or energy being converted, let's say, into a different form of matter or energy. And we have, I think, no empirical data for creation from nothing. So I think a more accurate or a better way perhaps to state the argument, which then turns into a problem for the argument, is everything which begins to exist has a material cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe would have a material cause. But that is exactly what Kalam is arguing against, namely because Kalam relies on creatio ex nihilo. And if you plug in creatio ex materia into the first premise, and you have creatio ex nihilo in the third one, then it's a non sequitur. So yeah, that would be my first contention.
Yeah, and you know, you brought up some really good points here, and this is why I don't want to just skip over them. I see the live chat happening now, and there's somebody online called the Atheist Girl, and she says, if everything has a cause, then your God must have a cause. And you know, I addressed that, and I said that if you stop and think about it, everything that has a beginning has a cause. And so I don't know how to say that more clearly. I can repeat it, but it's something you need to stop and think about, because I never said that everything has a cause. I didn't say that. That's not even what the cosmological argument says. The cosmological argument, the first version, the horizontal version that I was speaking of, says that everything that has a beginning has a cause. And so, you know, it's just something that it can go in one ear and out the other, or it could be quickly misunderstood, like the atheist girl just made a comment on it. So I'm just asking you to stop and think about the words that were just said, that, you know, everything that has a beginning has a cause. And so what we're really getting at is that God is eternal. And if
Yeah,
you don't want to use that word, that's fine. You don't have to use a divine word. If you don't want to get to that place that fast, that's fine. But I'm just saying, take a look at cause and effect, and take a look at the universe. And, you know, we're moving into premise 2 now. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on premise 1, but premise 2 is now looking at the universe, because that's where we're going with this. We look at the universe and say, the universe had a beginning. And, you know, I hear atheists talk about, no, you know, there's a big bang. Well, fine. If you think that's how it started, then what caused the big bang? So I guess where I'm going with this, if you don't, you know, hear anything else, I'm just asking you to hear that the universe had to have a beginning. It had to have something that caused it to begin. If you don't want to say what that something is, then that's fine. That's fine if you don't want to go there. But at least think this through, that if the universe had a beginning, it had a cause.
I mean, I basically would deny premise 2 outright. I mean, I think it is not yet established if the universe began. I mean, you can, for example, in cosmology, find certain models. One model would be, that comes to my head, the Carl-Chan model, which doesn't feature a beginning for the universe. I mean, the Big Bang is basically what I think the beginning of the universe as we know it. But for example, the Carl-Chan model, it would basically argue that the future of sort of the other side of the universe is sort of the beginning of our side. I mean, one can argue that the Carl-Chan model is not sound, and I don't necessarily think it's sound. Yes, actually, if you Google it, a quick, I think 40 page or so argument against it. But the point being that there are cosmological models which don't feature a beginning, and I think premise 2 is something very many people agree upon, but it is not as established as one might think.
Okay,
can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah,
Sai, jump in, and then let's go to Lisa to introduce her. So, Sai, if you want to jump in.
Well, Lisa can introduce herself first, and then I'll.
Hi,
Lisa, hello.
Hi, how are you guys? Can you hear me okay?
Hi.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Sai.
Hi.
So, yeah.
So let me say something about this. What Rene just said about the second premise, and I want to bring up a little physics history. When the idea of what we now call the Big Bang was first proposed by Lemaitre,
Catholic.
Yeah, a Catholic priest, it was absolutely unaccepted and scorned by almost every other physicist. There was some indication from the redshift data that might be true, but nobody wanted to believe it. And most of the physicists, including Fred Hoyle, who coined the term the Big Bang, that was a term of derision, because what Hoyle was saying is that's nonsense. And what most people said was this is a terrible idea because it basically sounds like it's from the Bible. It sounds like it's confirming the idea that God created the universe. Before that, the steady state model was what everybody believed in. I'm old enough to have learned the steady state model, even though by the time I was learning it, physics had moved forward, but I was still being taught that in school, that the universe had no beginning and no end. What happened was when the microwave radiation was discovered and many other experiments many other observations which could not be denied, it became then standard physics that the Big Bang, sudden beginning, the singularity, as Hawking called it, was real. And that's how the universe began. That caused a tremendous amount of anxiety among a lot of physicists who felt that this was basically a religious concept. So what eventually happened was that the model was accepted because the evidence was so strong for it, but very quickly, not very quickly, actually fairly recently, several groups have begun looking further because they still don't like this idea. And the book by Hawking about the origin of the universe is very interesting because he makes the claim that the universe could have, it's called the grand design. And in that book, Hawking makes the claim that the universe could have begun from nothing as long as there was gravity. And of course, he doesn't mention where gravity came from, and so that's pretty difficult. But since then, what Rene said is true. There have been a lot of other alternative models that have been proposed that will explain the origin of the universe before the Big Bang, how the Big Bang started, and it includes such things as inflation and deflation. It includes the model that Rene mentioned. The problem is, at this point, there is no evidence for any of those models. And so making a model, and I'm very familiar with that because I make a lot of models and I look at a lot of models, is very easy to do. It's not, I'm sorry, it's not easy to do. It can be done. But the test of a model, of course, is evidence. And so far, and I think Rene will agree with me, there really is no actual evidence for any of these models. They're interesting, but they're way behind in terms of the standard Big Bang.
Well, I mean, I do agree, but it's, I mean, science is really moving forward right now, and I don't claim that all these models are perfect. And the cold shell model, I don't know whether it sounds. I'm in no position to tell, but it's still an open question, and I think it's exciting. Cosmology and science in general.
Yeah, it is exciting. You're right, Rene. It is a very exciting concept.
Okay, I think
okay.
Let's move to another. Actually, Lisa, I understand that you have a pretty good background in some of the moral arguments with respect to God, or if we wanted to chat about that next, or if it's too soon and I'm jumping the gun here, if we wanted to go into psi and talk a little bit about the teleological arguments, I'd like to go into those too. And then, of course, Rene might have rebuttals on that, and he also might have some comments with respect to some theist things that he's been hearing on places like Twitter.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I mean,
Okay.
I would say maybe not get into too much arguments, but maybe two more, so and then we can talk about something more general.
Okay, well, I've never done this kind of thing before, so I don't know if I'm on, or if you can see my face or what's going on.
We can.
We see you.
Okay, all right. So did you want me to talk about the moral argument and like why I think it needs to be based objectively, or, I mean, is there a question that needs to be answered in regards to that, or just sort of state it as a Christian person?
Yeah, state it as a Christian person and just what you find convincing about it, or what you think that others might be convinced if they were to hear it.
Okay, well, from what I understand about it, the evolutionists would say that morals were basically evolved through social structures, and the Christians would say that morals are implanted in our soul, that we have a deep, innate knowing of right and wrong that comes from God, and it comes from being created in the image of God. So the argument then would be, is that true, or is it just a social structure? And the thing about the social structure, if evolution was true and socially we developed these morals because of evolution, then there's no reason why people should care for the sick, care for the poor, care for the people who are basically not strong, because the whole strong survival instinct should have taken over. And so there's a sense in every soul, I think, at least, unless you're something wrong with you, that you have some, you know, problems that are beyond normal problems, that, you know, you should care for the sick and the weak. And there's an innate knowing that to kill somebody else is wrong. And so, you know, if you just said that was a social structure that evolved because of pressure from society, and that was just something that people kind of came up with, it doesn't, to me, that makes less sense than just having an innate knowing of right and wrong that's put into the soul of a person. And so that to me is a strong moral argument for why we believe what we believe. And also, we need to put the moral objectives into a transcendent objective, not into some subjective place. Because if we put the morals into subjective people, for instance, the President of the United States or some group organization, then they can call the shots. And I always like to equate it to the Hunger Games. It's like, you could be President Snow, right? And you can basically, you know, okay, this is how we're going to handle morals of the day. We're going to like put these kids in these arenas and they're going to fight each other, and that's how we're going to avoid war. I mean, so if you put morals then into people and just say, okay, this person now is in charge of the moral standards of the day, well, then they can change those up anytime they want. But God gave us the morals in the 10 Commandments. Those 10 Commandments were, you know, kind of the standard even for basic law that we have in the court system now. So I think, you know, even if you don't have a Christian worldview, C.S. Lewis talked about what they call the Tao. It's T-A-O, it's pronounced Tao, which is a universal sense of morals that even everyone can, from Buddhist, atheist, Christians backgrounds, can ascribe to. And that would be, you know, don't kill people, be kind, do good things, something that everyone can adhere themselves to, even if they're not Christians. And I think that that's a really good compromise, because we're never going to have everybody in this whole entire world agreeing on everything. That's just the way people are. So instead of just saying, okay, well, hey, now we're going to have, you know, the President of the United States make the morals of the day, we should all agree on what C.S. Lewis called the Tao of universal morals, knowing, though, deep down inside that they have to be transcendent. They have to be above a person. Otherwise, that person can change them, and then we can be right at the Hunger Games. So I don't know if that makes clear sense, or if I'm communicating in a way that, you know, is understandable, but that's the way I look at it.
I agree. I think the soul is transcendent. And I also like the idea of the golden rule. If you notice, all cultures and all religions and all faiths basically follow some version of the golden rule.
Right.
That's right.
Rene, would you like to comment on that?
I think there's much to get into. I try to keep it short and sweet. And again, let me remind you, I'm not here as an enemy, but I'm basically just a guy here with some opinions. So yeah, basically, the first thing I would have to address is evolution. I don't want to get into the evolution versus creation debate, but Lisa basically says that evolution is about the survival of the strongest. That's not true. Evolution is about the survival not of the strongest individual, but of the fittest species. And fit is basically an old English term that Darwin used, but a fit species is basically a species or group of animals which is adapted to the environment or to nature, so that they will survive, reproduce, and produce offspring. And that's basically what would drive evolution. So it's not about the strongest, and basically social Darwinism has nothing to do with evolution. I would in fact argue that it would go against evolution, because the fittest species wouldn't kill off its own members. Then you said something about killing being wrong. I think there needs to be drawn a difference between killing and murder. I mean, killing is basically the termination, or as I would define it, the termination of somebody else's life, and murder would be determination of somebody else's life without their consent and without sufficient justification, such as self-defense or bodily autonomy. I wouldn't say that killing is always wrong. I mean, there are, for instance, when somebody would, it's not a pleasant example, so to speak, but if somebody was pointing a gun to your children, I don't know if you have children, but or to loved ones in general, I think killing that person with a knife would be completely justified, at least in my view. And yeah, what else can I get into? The golden rule. I do think the golden rule is a general good principle, but I don't like it in an absolute sense because it would lead to Kantian ethics, and I don't like Kantian ethics. I'm more of I would say I subscribe to secular humanism. I base my morals on human well-being, and I think that is also something that pretty much most people can agree to, maybe except for sociopaths, because they would have no empathy. But yeah, that would basically be my view.
So can I come in here on the issue of evolution? And
I'm an evolution expert, basically.
Yeah, I agree with what Rene said about evolution. It is, in fact, sometimes the weakest survives, and sometimes the smallest and et cetera survives, depending on their fitness. But Lisa was making a different point. I actually agree with everything Lisa said, because although I am an evolutionist, I do feel that evolution is the way that God produced biological diversity. There are limits to what evolution can do. And when we look at human beings, that's where we see those limits, because the idea that everything about humans can be attributed to evolutionary principles, to me, does not make sense and doesn't hold water. And I think the moral argument is, in fact, specifically where that falls down. There are lots of reasons for that. And I know there some very prominent atheists have proposed that all of human morality is evolution-based. And the reason being that there's something called kin selection. So if you're good to yourself, that you'll survive. If you're good to your immediate family members, that's good for you. And then one idea from Dawkins is that that's somehow extended to all people. And that explains why it's very common for strangers to suddenly do heroic acts to save complete strangers from peril. The problem with that idea is that it's a just so story. There's no evidence for it. And the moral imperative that Lisa discussed very eloquently, I think, is not something that really fits into the evolutionary paradigm at all. When you talk about people, and by the way, Francis Collins has proposed this as one of the main reasons that he became a Christian. When you propose that people will actually sacrifice themselves for other people, and of course the key figure in that story is Jesus Christ, but it also relates to the apostles and so many other martyrs of Christianity and people who are not Christians at all, who will sacrifice themselves for the sake of humanity, for the sake of a large group. That is not explainable by any evolutionary principles.
There's one other thing that I think is interesting too, regarding evolution. It doesn't explain consciousness.
Absolutely right. I agree.
And so I think that that's another really good indication that we're not just biochemical responses to our environment. Right. One of the things that I think is a really good reason for that is the intentional thought. Because if the brain is truly just a biochemical response, usually that means, I mean, you're the scientist, but usually from what I understand, that means that you're responding to your environment. But it's matter. Matter can only respond to the immediate. Matter can't respond to what's going to happen because that's not happened yet. So if you have an intentional state, your consciousness, you're planning for the future. You're intentionally planning to go somewhere, mentally or just whatever. I mean, that's consciousness, and that can't be a biochemical brain response to something. So, that's where I think it falls down as well. So there is a sense that human beings cannot be just purely biochemical responses to their environment, that the soul has to be immaterial. And I think one of the things I've studied and I really, really enjoy is how everyone comes to the table with a bias. So, Rene, your bias is going to be materialism because you're more scientific minded. So you want to be able to prove things empirically because that's comfortable for you. That's what you feel good about. That's what you feel like, I want to see and touch and feel and hear it. Whereas I'm definitely going to have a bias toward spiritual things, but I wasn't always spiritual. I was actually raised a secular humanist. I came to the Lord when I was 25 years old, but I came to the Lord through an experience that wasn't physical. So, everyone's got a different story and a different bias. And I think the key to this whole thing is making sure that you recognize your bias when you go in. So yeah, I'm going to definitely be leaning toward the fact that the soul and the body and humankind is not just biochemical responses to our environment, that there's more to being human than just responding to chemical stimuli. So that
also brings up the other issue, Stephanie, that you first raised, which is the teleological argument, because just building on what Lisa just said, there's no question that human beings have purpose. That's you can't argue with that. We have a sense of purpose. We act according to purpose. We have reasons for doing what we do. And then it turns out and so the question then is, where does that come from? How did that develop? If the universe has no purpose, if there's no purpose in the way planets move, which I can grant that these things just follow the laws of physics, that's fine. But somehow, somewhere along the line, we have to account for the development of a sense of purpose in people, and not just people. I mean, lots of animals do things with a purpose. Anyone who has a dog knows that, or a cat, or any animal. So that's a big question. And that sense of purpose is something that, that is the teleological argument that has to be explained. And I will just add one little quick thing, which is what Lisa said about consciousness is absolutely right. In fact, by we now, I mean scientists, cannot define what consciousness is. It's been hopeless. And it got to the point where Dan Dennett, the very famous philosophical atheist, wrote a book where he basically said that there is no such thing as consciousness. It's an illusion. We think we're conscious, but it's not really a thing. It doesn't really exist. Now, I may be misstating Dennett, or I may be simplifying what he's saying, but that's a sign that consciousness is something that we can't even tell you what it is, never mind how it got there. But we all know that we have it. We're all conscious. And we all know that we have a purpose, some purpose. If we don't have a purpose, we want to get one. So those things are very important to understand. Where could that have possibly come from?
But see, if you're a philosophical naturalist, aka a materialist, you're going to believe science will eventually figure that out. So Rene is probably sitting there going, oh, we'll figure it out eventually, because that's what science people, people that are science-minded believe that science will eventually solve everything.
No, that's not science.
No, I don't believe that.
Oh, you don't? Isn't that philosophical naturalism?
I don't believe that science will figure out everything, at least not in my lifetime. I mean, science will figure out a lot of stuff, but...
Okay, that's great.
Consciousness...
That's good. My brother is a evolutionary biologist, and he has faith in science. So his belief is that science will eventually figure out, like what Sai was saying, science is going to figure out consciousness, even though we don't know what it is now. Science will figure it out. And I think even with the beginning of the universe, with Stephen Hawking saying that there's a multiverse. See, the multiverse theory is just a way to figure out how life got so finely tuned and how this, Earth is so perfectly matched for humankind. And the whole, fine tuning argument is, oh, well, it must have been so many infinite possibilities that we just got lucky. So I think that that's, again, a belief in science because there's no proof of a multiverse theory. It's a belief. It's like you're having faith in something that you haven't yet been able to test.
Well, as far as the multiverse is concerned, I mean, I can put you at ease there. The multiverse is not a concept that was made to annoy Christian apologists, so to speak. It's I don't know if the multiverse exists. I don't particularly care all that much, but it doesn't have evidence, so to speak, yet. But there are reasons why the multiverse is a hypothesis, and it's not to explain away God.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there if I could, real quick, and just say that oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but if I sounded a little hostile,
No, you
I'm a
sound
nice guy, and I'm not going to war here, but
you're doing great, and I really appreciate the
Okay.
fact that you're against 4 Christians here, and you're the one guy. I mean, that takes guts.
Right.
Yeah.
Here.
No, I think it's great that you asked.
just the middle name.
Yeah, so I don't know if I can jump in here real quick, but I just wanted to say that I've noticed on Twitter, a lot of the comments go right directly toward making the creator of our universe out to be some kind of a moral monster murderer. And I will just stop and say that, you know, if somebody drew a concept that our creator is a flying spaghetti monster or a mass murderer, then no, I don't accept that at all. And so the concept itself is, first of all, just wrong from the very beginning. You know, I took a workshop from Doug Potter, who taught on this very topic. Does God command genocide? And a lot of people on Twitter like to go to that topic right away, talking about the flood, talking about this and that. And, you know, it's one of those concepts where you need to stop and really think about what you're saying, because, you know, God is loving. He's just. He is good. He's long suffering. He doesn't want anybody to perish. And, you know, these are concepts that just, they go in one ear, right out the other. And some people are not grasping the true concept and definition of our creator, that he is good. We are made in his image, male and female. He's full of grace. He's abounding in love. And yeah, he doesn't want anybody to perish. He gives life. And as far as I know, 10 out of 10 people die, you know, with the exception of Enoch and Elijah, but that's another story. And so 10 out of 10 people die. Are we going to be mad about that? You know, I'm not. I don't see our creator as a moral monster. I don't see him as a mass murderer. And so, no, I totally do not believe that he is a moral monster.
Okay, would anyone like to comment on that before? I'd like to actually turn it over and allow the people in the live chat, since they seem very active right now.
I would say maybe let's complete the full hour, and then maybe.
Okay.
I mean, how long do you plan to stream?
I would like to hear from Stephanie. You've only been the moderator. Do you have any things you'd like to contribute to these issues?
Well, I think that the moral argument actually is one of my favorites, and I think that when we look at some of the issues in the Bible, we have to remember something that I think that people get wrong. They say, well, if there's slavery in the Bible, then clearly there can't be a God, because God, or if there is a God, he was a beast because he allowed slavery. However, we do need to remember that almost everyone, 75 to 90% of people who lived during biblical times in some of these societies were enslaved, and this type of slavery was a lot different back then than it is than it was recently in our recent times here in the United States, where it was just ghastly and people were treated in horrible ways. And so during the biblical times, people were treated much differently, and God basically gave them some regulations and some rules towards that. And so that's something to consider. But another thing to consider is when we do judge this stuff, people are applying an objective moral standard against what they consider fair in the Bible. So we're actually using God's objective moral standard today to judge the past. Atheists use a relative standard. So if we say we can apply an objective moral standard to the past, we're actually using God's standard to determine whether or not what happened in the Bible is fair and is just and is love or is truth or any of the sorts of things that we can apply. We take an objective standard and we judge the practice that occurred in the Bible against that. So slavery itself, if you determine that it was immoral in the Bible, you also have to realize that you're using God's objective standard to make that determination.
One thing about slavery too is back in those days, they didn't have prisons. And so if you did something wrong, or if you were like, you know, indebted to somebody, you became a slave to pay off that debt, but they didn't have prisons.
Right.
So that was part of it. And you're right. I mean, they certainly did not treat slaves the way that we did. We have an atrocity, terrible, terrible record on that. So back in those days, I mean, slaves were treated pretty well, actually. I mean, considering that they probably would have been in prison in modern days. So that's another thing too. I mean, I don't know, the moral argument is important, but the problem of evil, I think, is the one that hangs most people up. Is like, why would, if God is good, then why does he allow evil? And
right.
I think,
you know what?
Actually,
Lisa, I see Peter in the live chat, and Peter is saying, did anyone perish in the flood? So that's an example of how atheists would like to try and make our creator out to be some kind of a moral monster. And I would say that the concept that some atheists are going with is that our creator is a moral monster. And I'm just saying, no, he's not. And so their concept of our creator is not the concept that I know. It's not the concept at all. And I see the atheist girl exclaiming in the chat box that there's no evidence that God exists. And so let me ask, is she listening to all of these arguments we are bringing up, the moral law, the intelligent design, and that the universe had a beginning and something caused it to begin? I think these things are good things to think about and good things to talk about.
Okay, Rene, do you want to comment on this?
I mean, what I wanted to say earlier, I think the strongest argument for atheism or against God would not be the problem of evil. I mean, it's not really an argument that most theists or most atheists, for that matter, are familiar with, but I do think that the argument from non-belief would be a good argument in favor of my side, basically. And I forgot my thought. Gone.
Could you say that again? Because I didn't understand. What argument?
The argument from non-belief, or the argument from divine hiddenness, as it is also called. Okay.
So you're saying that you think most atheists believe there's no God because there's not proof of it. Is that what you're saying? Mostly what people up?
That's one of the reasons. I think the problem of evil is persuasive, but I think one of the main reasons is that we don't think there's evidence for God, and so I believe in one. That's basically what I think would be the consensus.
It depends on how you define evidence. If you define evidence through the empirical scientific method alone, because what we're talking about are things that transcend the material, consciousness, the moral argument, the prime mover. Aristotle argued for that in 350 BC, that there must be a prime mover. I mean, even he figured something out, something must have caused all of this. So if those are all things you cannot put in the scientific method. So if you're saying that atheists are atheists because we can't measure it scientifically, then I think it depends on what kind of evidence you're wanting.
Well, one piece of evidence, and I don't think it will happen, but one piece of evidence would basically God just showing up and telling us, well, here I am.
He did.
God.
He did.
Right. He did show up.
God turned up. He
Yeah,
showed himself.
can I just step in real quick? Just real quick, I want to say there is an element of good philosophy that needs to come into play here when we discuss this. And, you know, if you're not willing to discuss the difference between good philosophy and bad philosophy, there seems to be a bit of a roadblock. And, you know, we need to take a look at the evidence, yes, but we also need to take a look at good philosophy. And apply our thinking skills. You know, some people just don't want to do that. And I would encourage you to take a look at, you know, throughout the ages, Lisa, you pointed out Aristotle and how he used his thinking skills. And, you know, of course, Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, he used his thinking skills. And so we do need to use our thinking skills to realize that this is not an accident. Why is there anything as opposed to nothing? And that comes from the vertical argument that I described at the very beginning of all of this. Why is there anything as opposed to nothing? And I heard Michael on Twitter recently give an answer, well, I don't know because science doesn't tell us. And I don't think that should be the end. That should not be the end. That isn't the answer. I mean, I realize that's where he's at right now, and that's fine. But I want to know, where did everything come from? Where, you know, is it an accident? I don't think that anybody would agree that if a car blew up, that it's going to create a solar system. Okay, it's just not happening. And so, you know, either the universe had some kind of a beginning, some kind of a big bang, or the atheist girl suggested, well, maybe the universe is eternal. And so, you know, that is a good question, but are we willing to sit down and think? You know, when we use our thinking skills, we are diving into either good philosophy or bad philosophy. I had one atheist tell me philosophy is useless. Well, really? You just used bad philosophy to make that statement that you think philosophy is useless. And so, to a large extent, I guess my point is, to a very large extent, we really do need to use some philosophy here, some good philosophy.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I'm very surprised that atheists have begun to reject philosophy as a field. I don't understand that. But I did want to answer something Rene said when he said one way to prove God would be that if he showed up. And that really resonates with me because a lot of people have asked me, how did you as a scientist atheist come to believe in God? And the answer is, it took a long time, and I didn't start to believe in God for a long time because all I could see was that the atheistic or materialistic, naturalistic worldview was full of holes. And we've already talked about all those holes. Where did the Big Bang come from? Where did, as Heather was just saying, how do we have something from nothing? How all those philosophical questions led me to question the idea of atheism, and it began making me think that maybe there is something else. But I still could not believe in God. And the way I believed in God was exactly because of what Rene said. I began reading the Gospels. I began reading about the life of Christ. I began reading the extra biblical evidence for the existence of Christ and for the resurrection. And it dawned on me that God did show up. And he not only showed up in the form of a man, but he proved that he was God by rising from the dead, by performing the miracles he performed, by stimulating tremendous amount of belief in him as God among not only his apostles, but among 100 years of Christianity spread like wildfire. And the only way to explain that is that something was real. And once I saw that, then I understood that God is real and he came to earth for our sake and for our salvation. And then I became a Christian.
Okay, can I jump in?
Sure.
Yes.
So basically, with Saya, I mean, I am not at all opposed to if God shows up, if he basically would give me the experience that you had, I would be willing to believe in God. Whether I would worship him then is an entirely different issue. I mean, I would then God would have to convince me that he is moral. I mean, I think I do read the Bible differently than most Christians probably. And to Heather's point, why would there be something rather than nothing? I mean, I would basically put it to you, why is there a God rather than nothing? And I mean, what you can then say is that God just is. God is eternal. He has always been there. But if I'm then being intellectually dishonest, then I could also just as easily say, well, matter and energy just is, and I wouldn't need to give an account of it. So that, yeah.
One of the things about matter, though, and I thought this was pretty convincing, can matter create mind? To me, it makes more sense that mind creates matter.
You know, a really good book is by Robert Lanza called Biocentrism that piggybacks on that idea.
Yes. There's actually a fairly sophisticated scientific view which is not related to theism, and it comes from, you know, the observer effect and some of the quantum mechanical observations and results, that says that actually the universe is created by minds.
Yeah.
I even read recently a book which is very good called The Great Unknown, and it's by a scientist who's not a theist, and one of the titles is Creation is Observation. So, you know, this whole idea of which came first, matter and mind, which Lisa just brought up, this is very interesting, and it's philosophically interesting. It's not necessarily theistic, but what we've learned from quantum mechanics and the real nature of the universe is it's not a simple reductionist materialistic situation at all.
I mean, I do want to comment on philosophy. I mean, basically, you said, or someone said that philosophy would be unimportant. I don't agree with that. I mean, say you are a scientist and would probably agree that science is based on philosophy.
Yes.
So you can't do science without philosophy, and I think philosophy is certainly important, but and it's interesting, but I find science more interesting, to be honest. But philosophy does have its place, definitely. I would maybe then ask maybe for the audience, when are we going to get into that?
That's a good point. Let me go ahead and ask the audience if you would like to ask a question. I know I said if Atheist Girl wanted to ask a question, but if anyone else here would like to throw something up there on the board, that'd be great. I don't see any right now. Well, one question. Oh, here we go. Well, that's not a question. Well, one of the questions I had seen is, would anyone like to speak to what a soul is? Because I did see that before.
Yeah, I'll just say real quick that I have studied what the Old Testament says. And first of all, you know, what I have come to find out is that a human being is a living soul that has a body. And some people get that mixed up. Some people think that we're just a physical body and they don't even know what a soul or a spirit is. So I would say, you know, that the soul that is in us, that is the living, that's who you are. You are alive and you're a living soul. And so, you know, it gets a little bit into the afterlife. You know, that's what dualism refers to. If you start studying the concept of a body and a soul, those are two things. And so, you know, that's the dualism aspect of a human being. A human being is a living soul and it has a body. And so that's my understanding of a human being. If you have a different view, that's fine, but at it.
I
Okay.
was told that the soul is a combination of your mind, your emotions, and your will. So your free will is part of your soul. And it's really, this is another sort of tangent, so you can hold me back here in a minute if you need to hold me back. But the whole concept of near-death experiences, now that people are being resuscitated a lot, about 1 out of every 4 persons have a type of near-death experience. And they're reporting things that they could not have known. There's no way they could have known in that experience because technically they were dead. And they, like, for instance, people would float up above, you know, the hospital table or something and see the dude that was working on it had, you know, no hair or something, you know. I mean, they're just stuff that they could not have known, you know, that proves that the bodily death is not the end of that person, that person does survive bodily death. And so that's, I mean, I've done a little studying on near-death experiences only because I'm fascinated by it, but that shows, you know, in some ways that there's something that's going on, you know, beyond just the physical.
Yeah, that's really good. Can I just say that Florida Line is saying you haven't defined what the soul is. And so I want to point out again what I just said, that what I have found out is that a human being is a living soul. And so your soul is you. It is you. It's who you are. You are a living soul. The word soul sometimes is interchangeable with spirit. And so, you know, these can help some people who are willing to work with analogies. An analogy, I'm sure, is you know what it is. There's something that's the same, but there's something that's different. So if we say, take a look at the wind, really see the wind right now? You know, you see the tree that's moving. You see the wind that is moving the tree. And so you know that the wind exists. You know that it's there. And so it's the same with your spirit and your soul that is in you. And yeah, but it's an analogy. And so if you go right to what is different about it, then it's just a point. So with an analogy, you look at what is the same. And so, yeah, like I said, what I have found to be is that a human being is a living soul.
So Heather, I think what she may be asking is more specific, like, what does that human being, living soul mean? Like, so I would just give it those 3 things that I said. It's your mind, your emotions, and your will.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Let me go back. I see a couple of questions here. Actually, there are a few, but one of them is if we can define God, and a second one, just to piggyback and go back to Atheist Girl's question, is she wondered if we had not read the Bible or seen the Bible or had access to the Bible, she said something like this, would we still follow a Jewish carpenter?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Does somebody want to? I'll let somebody else go.
Well, that's a really good question. You can know God through creation, and a lot of people have like sort of spiritual experiences just looking in the beautiful sunset or the feeling of falling in love. I mean, it's another whole thing. Where does love come from? It's not just a biochemical response. Love is one of those things that I think is indicative of the image of God in us. So if I never saw the Bible or never read the Bible, would I still follow a Jewish carpenter? I guess I could if somebody gave me a testimony, if someone was able to share their story with me. And that's pretty much, the oral tradition is pretty much how the Bible did start. People weren't literate back then, and so they did share the Bible or the stories of what they knew just through their testimonies and what they experienced. So if somebody would share with me, yes, I mean, I would probably definitely still believe. However, the fact that we have a Bible makes it much better.
Also, there's historical evidence that happened to a huge extent, because when Paul and the other apostles were going throughout the world of the Gentiles, where no one had ever seen a Bible or heard of it, they converted a huge number of people to Christianity following the Jewish carpenter. Right. Who had never heard of a Bible, never opened one. So right. Obviously that has happened to the point where from 12, there were 1 million followers in 100 years. So that's pretty good testimony that, yeah, the answer is yes.
Well, I think back in that time, one would also have to mention that basically atheism in that days was basically non-existent. I mean, the Bible does, I think, draw sort of a difference between the Greeks and the Jews. Like, the Greeks basically, as the Bible calls them, they had multiple gods, and they had to use different tactics. But if you already believe in Genesis and in the creation and stuff, then it's gonna be more easy than maybe today to convert people. But I did see in the chat a question by Peter, and he asks whether I think Lisa has published her story.
I'm sorry. Well,
Peter, gonna go for it. Asks you if you have published your story. I think he refers to the near-death experiences or stuff.
Do I have my testimony online? I don't.
Yeah.
I read yours though, Rene. I read your testimony. I went on your blog and read it. So
The road to atheism.
Oh, was I an atheist? Is that what he's asking?
No, I have like as my pinned tweet my road to atheism, which is my blog.
Right. I read that. Yeah. So I thought one thing I want to point out. I think you were really terrific for being here today. By the way. And I like your openness. I see in you, you have a soft heart and you're not angry. I mean, I've met people that are atheists that are just angry. And I've been in those little atheist things on Twitter where I've been like just reamed up one side and down the next with every foul language you could possibly imagine. So I really appreciate the fact that you are respectful and you're here and you're opening, we're talking about all this stuff and having a great dialogue. So God bless you, Rene. He's gonna bless you.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I can be angry, but if people are nice to me, then I tend to be nice back. So
well, but you're here. You're here, and you're asking good questions, and you're open. I mean, that's great. That's awesome. So good for you.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick about. I don't know if this is what they're looking for. Peter and the Atheist Girl, I'm not sure if they're looking for a particular resource, but I do recommend a book by John Cooper, and the title is Body, Soul, and Life Everlasting. Looking for, more information on what is a soul, what is holistic dualism, what is a human being? Does a human being have a soul? It answers a lot of good questions. It's very thorough. And it does go through the Old Testament and the New Testament.
And Heather, there's another really good book too. J.P. Moreland, right?
Right.
J.P. Moreland is a philosopher. He teaches at Harvard. He wrote a book and it's really skinny, so it doesn't take a long time to read. It's called The Soul, and he goes into the scientific aspect of what the soul is and how it cannot be something that's biochemical. So I highly recommend J.P. Moreland book, The Soul.
Yeah, I do. And I'll just point out that is nonfiction. I don't know why the Atheist Girl is saying I prefer nonfiction, because we just gave 2 nonfiction books. I don't know why
I think she was being sarcastic.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Okay, so Florida Line is on here, and she's wondering where the soul came from. I think that, I don't know if we've covered that or if we can expound on that a little bit.
Well, we were talking about it with respect to evolution, and I don't think that's the place to look for it. I think the soul comes from God, and I think that the description of where the soul came from is pretty well clarified in Genesis when we read that God breathed the breath of life into Adam. In my view, that's what makes us human. That God breath. And what makes us human is a soul.
That's the image of God.
Yeah.
That's one way we're created.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the soul is something that you can't measure empirically, and
right.
The bottom line, you guys, in some of this, I mean, when the rubber hits the road, there is an element of faith. I mean, you know, nobody really wants to. I mean, it seems to me like atheists don't want to say that we have to have faith in everything. They want absolute 100% perfect answers. And you know what? We're not going to be able to give them, and we have good answers, and we can answer a lot. And Rene, your blog said that you didn't think Christians thought through their faith. That's not true.
Where exactly?
You wrote that you thought that Christians kind of just, you know, basically were taking all the stuff hook, line, and sinker, and you didn't really think that we were thinkers. And Christians are thinkers.
Was that in my Road to Atheism or in another post?
The one that you had implied, maybe you didn't verbatim say this, but you implied that you thought really did.
I think I know what you're referring to, and what you were referring to is basically in my religion class, with which I had in 11th grade, we talked about theodicy, and I found the answer, which basically boiled down to God has his reasons and he's mysterious. I found that very unconvincing.
Well,
very unsatisfying.
I can understand.
So I think people more in my country also, they hold theism passively, like they don't really think about the issues the way I do. They basically just live their life. They do mentally assess God, like the people in Germany, but they don't look at the various arguments. That's what I said.
Well, I just was referring to the fact that a lot of people think Christians don't think through their faith. And Christians really do think through their faith. I mean, the people that I'm hanging out with now, they're all into Christian apologetics and stuff. I mean, these people think about every little T that's crossed and I that's dotted. You know, I mean, they're very into thinking. So Christianity is a thinker's faith. And I think that's why there's a lot of intellectual people that are attracted to Christianity, because Christianity is the only religion that is falsifiable. Because all the other religions are based on subjective experiences, but Christianity is falsifiable in the resurrection event.
Exactly. And in fact, it's interesting.
I think I would say basically Islam also is basically based on the inerrancy of the Quran. So, like, if you could prove that the documents of the Quran, that they are not unreliable, or that they are not reliable, or that I don't really know right now what they believe about the documents, but I think they believe that they are basically the originals. That
right,
they
believe that.
the originals, and if you could disprove that,
yeah.
And basically, Islam is also falsifiable. I think in the 99 names of Allah, he has like 99 names, and if you can like show that 2 of these names are incompatible, then basically you would also have disproved Islam.
Let me add on to that just for a second. I just wanted to comment about Islam and about other religions. One thing to note that's actually pretty neat is the fact that the Bible has at least 33 or more authors in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that differs from every other holy book there is. Every other holy book was founded by the beliefs of one person and one man, one person who is a man, and so that distinguishes us. And the other thing that distinguishes the Bible from other religions is the fact that many of the people who wrote in the Bible were martyred for their faiths. So many of the people who wrote other religious texts were not martyred. Instead, in many cases, they were exalted. And Muhammad's a great example of that. Muhammad lived a very good life towards the end of his life, had much power, and had accumulated quite a bit of land. And so it's a completely different sort of life than the early Christians had in the first 300 years when they were worshiping illegally. And especially in the first handful of decades, they worshipped illegally, and they were under people like Nero, where they were burnt and they were crucified and they were beheaded. So that sort of faith is amazing and is in contrast, stark contrast to every other faith.
That's right. Good point.
What I would like to say concerning that, which is basically they wouldn't have died for a lie. I mean, basically what you would need to have is a sufficient reason to die for what you know to be a lie. One of those reasons could be the resurrection, but maybe another reason that I don't know if we would have evidence for that, but another reason maybe to protect your family. I mean, I don't know how many parents are here, but I think if it would protect your children, then I think many here would agree that you would also die for a lie. But again, I don't know if we could ever have evidence that they had another reason for dying for a lie if we assume that they died for a lie.
Could I just make a comment about something Lisa said about thinking, Christians thinking?
Yes, please do.
I think that's a very important point, and it explains, among other things, one of the things that we often hear from atheists, which is there are so many different Christian sects, which one is correct? And the answer is, of course, we don't know which is correct, and we don't talk about it, which is correct. But the reason there are so many different Christian sects or different denominations is that Christians think. And when people think, they often disagree. So when they disagree, they form a new denomination that may be different from the other denominations. So the point is that the fact that there are so many different versions of Christianity does not go well with the other atheist argument, which is that all Christians just follow lockstep into whatever they're being told. Obviously, that can't be true, because if that were true, there would only be one church, as for a while there was. But even within that one church, the Roman Catholic Church, there was tremendous diversity of opinion and views, and eventually it turned into the Reformation. So we can't have it both ways. If Christianity is something that people have to believe and cannot deviate at all from the dogma, then you wouldn't have Presbyterians and Methodists and all sorts of various Protestant denominations, as well as the Eastern Orthodox and all the other versions of Christianity. So I fully agree with Lisa that it's very much a thinking religion, which is one of the reasons I was very attracted to it.
Yeah,
Well,
I totally agree.
one thing I would like to say, I mean, I think one further reason, and this would go against what Sai said, but I think people in general are lazy, atheists are guilty of it, Christians are guilty of it, but many people don't really go back to the original text, like they don't do like the hard work of maybe looking up what certain words would mean in Hebrew and how they would change in a certain context. And I think one thing about Christianity that really shocked me, and about one denomination, would be Calvinism. I don't know if you're familiar with Calvinism. I mean, it's basically the view that Jesus died for a group of the elect, their elect group of people, and God basically gave them a personal revelation, and they are predestined to heaven, and basically everyone else is predestined to hell. So, I mean, that's basically Calvinism in a nutshell.
Not a Calvinist.
I'm not a Calvinist either. No.
Any Calvinists in the room?
No, but about Calvinism and Arminianism, let me just point out that there's a whole list that separates the two. And so I know people who might find a few points from Calvinism to be true and a few points from Arminianism to be true. But, that just goes to show that we have thinking Christians out there.
Exactly.
Who are thinking. They are trying to put their beliefs together, and they might vary out there, but it's man-made. Calvinism is a man-made kind of a system that you have your 5-point Calvinistic view. You have, strict Calvinism. You have, light Calvinism. You have all these different forms of Calvinism now, because some people say, you know what, part of Calvinism, yeah, I agree with it, but there's some things about it that I don't agree. So I wouldn't say that you have to be one or the other. I don't think that it's necessary to say you have to be, Calvinistic or Arminianistic.
Good. I think what we should do now, just because we're getting towards the end of our conversation, I think if we wanted to each have a closing point, or if anyone wants to say a couple of words before we close out, maybe we can start with Sai, as I look that he's in the first position on the screen here.
Okay. Well, first I'd like to say thank you to Stephanie for organizing this, and thank you to the other panelists here. Rene, I will echo what Lisa said. I think this is great for you to sit here and deal with all of us, and you've raised some very good points, and we appreciate it. And also to Lisa and Heather, thank you for your insights, which are always things I've never thought of. In terms of my own feelings and thoughts about what we're doing, I think this is a great forum to express our views about how we feel about God and Jesus Christ, religion, etc. And I think it's worthwhile, and I hope we do more of these, because discussion and civil discourse is what we're all about. And if we convince somebody, that's great. If we don't, we can keep talking. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's go to Rene. And Rene, I want to thank you for being our resident atheist here. Hopefully we can attract a few more next time.
So I would also like to thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me and for letting me join all of you. I too think it was very respectful discourse, and I appreciated the opportunity. And I do think all of us will go out of this conversation maybe with having something to think about. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. And let's move over to Lisa.
Okay, thank you so much for having me on, Stephanie. It was really nice to meet you. I think I follow you on Twitter. And Rene, you're a great guy, hon. God bless you. You have a good heart. You have a good mind. Keep on using it. Keep on searching for the truth. Sai, you're awesome. Heather, I wish I saw your face instead of just your voice. Gotta get your video working next. One final thought. 1 Corinthians 15 says, Paul says, you know what? If the resurrection didn't happen, don't believe it. And that's the one thing that Christianity does that no other religion does. You can't find that in the Quran. You can't find that in Buddhism. You can't find that in any other religious writing that says basically, hey, if this didn't happen, then chuck it. So to me, that is really important, that he actually is asking you to challenge it. Paul is saying, hey, if this didn't happen, we got nothing to believe in. So that's unique to Christianity. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Read it. Bye.
Excellent point. Heather?
Yeah, so thank you, Stephanie, for having me on this show. And thank you, Rene, for being here. Sai, thank you. And Lisa, it was great to be with you again and talk to you. I'm just really thankful to be here. You know, I could go on and thank so many people in my life who have been teachers. You know, Beth Moore has been a big influence in my life. All the professors at SES, where I've taken classes, have done just a remarkable job. I think I've had at least 10 different professors over there that I would give thanks to all of them.
I can't.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for having me. If there's one thing to walk away with from today, I would say, please consider that the universe had a beginning and that there is a cause to the beginning of the universe, and that the cause has to be eternal. If you can try to think that through, that would be a good first step.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. I really appreciate all of your contributions. And if you're interested in following us next week, I'd like to keep doing this. And so, again, thank you so much. I see some of the people who are on here that have been on here before. And so I also appreciate our live chatters. And if anyone in the live chat group would like to join us in the coming weeks, let me know. And you can reach us. You can reach me at christian-apologist.com, or you can reach me on Twitter at LEAD1225. And that is all. And we'll talk soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.